Ahsoka has been found dead. In a new comic adaptation of The Rise of Skywalker, she appears as a Force ghost alongside Anakin, Obi-Wan, and other Jedi who've canonically passed on.
And you may be asking yourself, wasn't this already confirmed in the movie? But Dave Filoni, the creator of Ahsoka, seems to think otherwise.
It doesn't really have any big implications to what I'm doing with the character, to be honest. I just thought it was a really fun thing. I don't think of it in a literal story way. The film to me is like a different area.
Immediately after the film's release, he also posted this picture to Instagram comparing her to Gandalf, a character people once thought was dead as well.
But this isn't the first time Ahsoka's played with death. In fact, when you look throughout her almost 20-year history, there are 3 major points where, narratively, she should have died.
But the interesting part of Ahsoka is that she's a character known for almost being shoehorned into pre-existing stories, for better or for worse. From starting out as Anakin Skywalker's never-mentioned Padawan to becoming a key figure in the formation of the Rebel Alliance, she's always existed in this sort of out-of-frame corner of the galaxy.
But as her story continues and she survives across major galactic events, her unwillingness to die begins to impact other stories, raising questions as to whether the benefits outweigh the negatives of her miraculous ability to live.
Is this just a case of a creator who's grown too close to his character and can't let go?
Or is it possible there's some grand plan that we just can't see?
And finally, is it time to say goodbye to Ahsoka Tano?
Welcome back to This is the Wayseekers, a podcast for Star Wars fans by Star Wars fans. My name's Austin SWE, and I'm joined with my co-host, one of the biggest fans of Ahsoka Tano, a founding member of the Church of Tano, a 3-time inductee into the Ahsoka Tano Hall of Fame. I'm here with you, Scotty Holiday. How are you feeling today? Are you excited to talk about one of your favorite characters of all time?
Well, one, I don't feel deserving of all those accolades. However, I am really excited to talk about Ahsoka with you, especially because this is stuff we've talked about off screen, off the pod, and there's a lot of conversation to be had around Ahsoka and whether or not she should or shouldn't die and when she eventually will, or if she even will. So, I'm really excited to talk about her with you and to really dig into it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. There is a lot of conversation around Ahsoka living or dying, the whole Ahsoka lives thing that Dave Filoni puts on. Like we said in the intro, there's 3 major points where Ahsoka really should have died, but they either went back on it or played with death or something. It's almost like she's like this mystical being. She just can't die. And maybe that's connected to some things we see in the Clone Wars. I don't know. We'll talk about it all today. But yeah, it's also funny to be like, Scotty, we're talking about your favorite character and how I think she needs to die.
I mean, it is what it is. Like, I'm like Dave Filoni. Do I love Ahsoka? Yes. But do I recognize that we can't have her live forever? Yes. So she's got to die at some point. But it's like, what is the perfect place? What is like, how is she going to go out in a blaze of glory? Because that's the only thing. Like, she can't die unceremoniously at this point. It's got to be something epic.
Absolutely. Something epic, extraordinary, big, and even though it's already happened, they need to find something that tops the other times that she's already died and sacrificed herself. So
without undoing it.
Exactly. But let's get straight into this. So we all know that Ahsoka Tano was introduced in the Clone Wars movie in 2008. She was created by George Lucas and Dave Filoni, and she was introduced as Anakin Skywalker's Padawan, despite there being no mention of her in Attack of the Clones or Revenge of the Sith. Do you have any feelings about that, Scotty, as a big Ahsoka fan? This is like the first major time where she was kind of shoehorned into something, dropped into these 2 movies where she's never mentioned at all.
I didn't for a while, but funny enough, going back and watching Revenge of the Sith for the anniversary in the theater this year, it did feel like there was a piece missing to it, and I think that's because of how they integrated the Clone Wars Season 7 and the Siege of Mandalore arc into Revenge of the Sith so well. And it's almost like, kind of like we talked about before, I wish they re-added the Mon Mothma deleted scenes into Revenge of the Sith. I kind of wish I was seeing the 4-hour cut with the Clone Wars Season 7 integrated into it too. Because it just feels like there's a missing piece. There's just this unspoken part of it. And like, even with Anakin and Padme, like Padme and Ahsoka were also friends and Padme didn't have much to do. So she could have been calling Ahsoka, dealing with, hey girl, I'm pregnant. Like, this is so amazing. I can tell you because you're not in the order anymore. Like, like whatever. Yeah, it
Mhm,
just feels like there's a weird piece of it missing. I didn't used to feel that way.
mhm.
Did it change at all for you from the Clone Wars season 7?
From the Clone Wars season 7, I thought that that was interesting because obviously what happened is we saw the Clone Wars season 1 through 5 where Ahsoka leaves the Order, and
Mhm.
then for like 10 years we didn't know what happened next. And
Mhm.
it always worked out nicely because she came back in Star Wars Rebels and you have her story there and you get
Yes.
this continuation. But she has this line talking about, "I'm no Jedi."
Oh
So
god.
I was honestly surprised that she was kind of so tied into the Jedi Order as much as she was in season 7. Obviously, she wasn't a part of it, but she was working with them. She saw Anakin again. I had thought that they would just never reunite again after that. Because the
Mhm.
thing about Ahsoka being put in between these two movies is that from a writing perspective, she had to be out of the picture by Revenge of the Sith. And when
Mhm.
seasons 1 through 4 and then even 5 were coming out, it was like, how are we going to do this? How is she going to die in Order
Yeah.
66? What's going to happen? And then when she left the Jedi Order, it was like, oh, okay, she left the Order a
Mhm.
year before Revenge of the Sith even happened. So there's a whole year where Anakin can not forget about her, but like move on to where it's not a big part of his life anymore. But then
Mhm.
season 7 comes out and she's still a big part of his life. She literally is reunited with him right before the Battle of Coruscant and Revenge of the Sith. So that's when it starts to get kind of muddy. It's like, okay, it was fine at the start. It was like, okay, Ahsoka's here and you can kind of make sense of it. But then as it went on, she was still included in the story and put even further and further and further until it just eventually became too much. But the too much didn't happen in the Clone Wars. The too much
Mhm.
happened later on because I still think that this is it's okay. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, she's not mentioned in Revenge of the Sith, but it's not the worst thing ever, right? Like you can still make sense of it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's so funny because thinking of it now, like the Clone Wars season 7 is like a double edged sword because as an Ahsoka fan, we wanted to know what happened to her after she
Mhm,
left the Order. But in telling that and then reintegrating it with Anakin's story to the point where this man kept her lightsabers and
mhm,
like channeled his energy into them. And I assume he only kept them because he expected to give them back to her someday.
mhm,
Like, we know he never stopped thinking about her. I mean, there's even the Crystal Crisis on Utapau arc that we never got to see, where, Anakin talks to Obi-Wan about how upset he still is about the Ahsoka's
mhm.
situation and her leaving the Order.
Yeah.
So it helps to kind of fast forward Anakin's fall in Revenge of the Sith, I think,
Mhm,
indirectly, because obviously it's, I guess you could call it almost like a retcon of a way to add to, like, here's another reason why Anakin was so unstable and so willing to risk it all, because he already had this
mhm.
horrible loss with his Padawan. Well, he had the loss with his mom, then his Padawan, now his
Mhm.
wife. So, like, this was
Yeah.
like third time's a charm. So
Yeah.
I do appreciate how it adds to that, but it is odd that she's never mentioned Obi-Wan and
Yeah.
Anakin. It's like at that point they're like, we don't speak about her anymore. But you were still
Yeah.
talking about her.
Yeah, literally 5 minutes before Revenge of the Sith started. It's very interesting, and then comes in the whole behind the scenes aspect of it where Ahsoka was actually not supposed to live that far into the timeline.
Yeah.
George Lucas was always team Ahsoka does not survive Order 66. George
Mhm.
Lucas wanted her to die. Dave Filoni was the one that was like, "No, I want Ahsoka to live." He actually talks about it in a featurette. I'll play that clip right now.
I don't think it's a mystery that I've always been a bit more in the Ahsoka lives camp. And, and George has been very full on in the Ahsoka dies camp. I think I've said that before, if not revelation for you. So I thought expelling her from the Jedi Order is a good movement towards that end. And we stand on that bold new frontier for her. Things have changed. She is not the same character.
The thing about that clip is I do agree with Dave Filoni. That's so much
Mhm.
more compelling to have Ahsoka leave the Jedi Order than just die
Yeah.
in Order 66 because that's so obvious. Instead, you get like another layer added to the disillusionment of the Jedi Order, the way that the entire establishment has kind of decayed from the inside. They've
Mhm.
just completely lost their way, becoming warriors instead of peacekeepers. And I love what Ahsoka adds to that. Not to mention Ahsoka being in the Clone Wars as a 14-year-old, what that adds
Yeah.
to you know, how lost the Jedi were. They were literally using child soldiers, and the
Mhm.
Ahsoka series really highlighted that when they had a literal little kid playing Ahsoka Tano. Because in the
Yeah.
animation, she looks way older.
It's something, like you said, we didn't think about because we just saw
Mhm.
Ahsoka as an animated character, but when we saw it in live action, it was like, "Oh my god, she's a literal child." The thing
Right.
that I like, though, in general about Ahsoka being in the Clone Wars series is we get the POV of everything, not just
Mhm.
of the war itself, but, like, she is a peek behind the curtain of the downfall of the Jedi, and that
Mhm.
culminates at the climax where they think she bombed the Jedi Temple,
Mhm.
and it really gives us a more in-depth view of the Jedi Order that we wouldn't have got otherwise. Plus, it sets her up as a character that we haven't really followed. This
Mhm.
character who has never really stopped being a Jedi,
Mhm.
but has left the Order and is forging her own path.
Mhm.
Um, in general, when it comes to that, I like that she continued on from the Clone Wars because of that.
Mhm.
Because, like, as we've already established, I love Ahsoka. I love the Clone Wars series. So I don't want anyone to take this as like I'm not happy she lived, because I'm very
Right.
happy that she survived, and I'm very happy with the stories that we got. But it, like I said, it's a double-edged sword.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. And that's when you start to question, do the positives outweigh the negative? In my opinion, when we're looking at the Clone Wars, the positives outweigh the negative. The
Yeah.
negative here is just like continuity issues. And you could really just chalk that up to Anakin just mentioned her off screen. The camera cut off before he said her name. But in that scene when he's crying to Padme, he did mention her.
Right.
Um, there's there's ways around it, but where we start getting into the danger territory is when she starts living on into the Galactic Civil War, the entire
Mhm.
story of Luke Skywalker and the rebellion defeating Darth Vader. That's when it's like,
Gets a little messy.
okay, yeah. Because she starts off in Star Wars Rebels, and this is before, Luke Skywalker's introduced. That's my
Mhm.
opinion of any Order 66 survivor. It's totally fine for them to live past Order 66, but when you start to live past Luke Skywalker's introduction into the rebellion, that's when it's like, yikes, yikes. But her starting off as being just a key figure in the formation, perfectly fine. We saw she was Fulcrum, operating under that code name. She's
Mhm.
coordinating rebel cells. She's assisting Kanan and Ezra, and that works really well because Ezra is like this. He's a sign of the new age to come for the Jedi, and having
Mhm.
Ahsoka, and obviously Kanan also was a Jedi, but he was a Jedi Padawan during
Mhm.
the time. We have Ahsoka, someone who was more established during the prequel era, actually being able to pass on that knowledge. I love seeing
Mhm.
all of that. That was really great.
I agree. And I think what works out so beautifully about the three of their relationship is that she's a non-conventional Jedi, and we
Mhm,
know Ezra is a very non-conventional Jedi. And I
mhm,
think that Ahsoka acted as a mentor in different ways to both Kanan and Ezra, which was really great to see throughout the series. And I
mhm,
love their interactions, and I love the integration of her with the Alliance because, as I kind of mentioned, she's always been a Jedi. She's
mhm,
always going to be fighting for the people. So the
mhm.
idea of her sitting out the Galactic Civil War, or not even the Galactic Civil War, because she does technically sit out the Galactic Civil War, which is a whole other issue we'll get into. But
Mhm.
I like seeing her in the formation of the rebellion because she never really stopped fighting. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I don't.
100%.
And she's like Anakin. She just can't sit and ignore an issue when she sees it. She's
Mhm.
gotta. She's got to help people. And I mean, that's also kind of as a Torgruda, they're like very in tune with the people around them and their emotions. So it would make sense that she would want to continue to help the people. But
Yeah.
like you mentioned, Galactic Civil War starts happening
Mhm.
and things get a little messy.
Yeah. So let's get into that where it all starts. So we know that Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader. Now we're in
Mhm,
the era in Star Wars Rebels where Anakin Skywalker is Darth Vader, and
mhm.
like we mentioned before, there was no season 7 yet. So we actually had no idea what happened with
Yeah.
Anakin and Ahsoka after she left the Order. So it's time to wrap up that story here in Star Wars Rebels, right? It's time to
Mhm.
have Ahsoka versus Vader. Such an interesting fight. All of Anakin's fights are so interesting because he's always fighting somebody that he either trained or trained him. So he's literally almost always fighting himself. Like
Kind of,
his
yeah.
own moves, the things that he's learned and picked up, the things that he's passed on to others. I always loved that, and I loved the Ahsoka and Vader duel on Malachor. I'm sure
Yes.
you agree.
Twilight of the Apprentice is like such good Star Wars animation, such good Star Wars storytelling in general, like
Hmm.
across all mediums. But
Hmm.
a lot of people, and I don't know if I would say I argue this point, but a lot of people argue this should have been the moment where Ahsoka finally died, sacrificing herself for
Hmm.
not only Kanan and Ezra, but, you know, trying to bring Anakin back from Vader,
Hmm.
but ultimately knowing she couldn't do it. So what is
Yeah.
she going to do instead? Buy the rebels time so they can escape and continue on in the fight.
Exactly, exactly. And hot take, I am one of those people that thinks Ahsoka should have died in Star Wars Rebels. In that moment, fighting Vader, when she sacrificed herself so that Hera and the others in the Ghost Crew could get away, it was such an Ahsoka moment because on one end, people might say Vader killing Ahsoka is a good end to her story, but that's not exactly what it was. It was
Hmm.
Ahsoka sacrificing herself,
Hmm.
allowing Vader to kill her so that the key figures in the rebellion could get away and
Hmm.
continue on to fight the fight and create the rebel alliance. It
Yeah.
was such a perfect moment for Ahsoka because, as we mentioned, she's kind of shoehorned into these stories in a way that doesn't always uplift them. But in this case, Ahsoka basically allowing the Rebel Alliance to happen by sacrificing herself, perfect ending for the character. And I couldn't imagine her going out any other way, to be honest. But here we are. She survived because in season 4, it's revealed that they literally invented time travel to save
Not
Ahsoka Tano.
well, Dave Filoni won't call it time travel, but he's like, it's like time travel, but it's different. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, but how? Like, please explain.
Right. Time travel adjacent. I understand there's all these rules. And I honestly do like the commentary of like the force dictating things. Like Ahsoka was able
Hmm.
to be pulled out because the force needs her to be alive. But if Ezra were to pull out Kanan, who sacrificed himself, it it wouldn't have worked out. It the entire galaxy might have collapsed between space and time, and then who the fuck knows what would have happened there. But
Yeah.
at the same time, it also feels like this cosmic cop out of like, well, let's just bring Ahsoka back, and then that literally does confirm that she sat out during the Galactic Civil War. She never confronted Palpatine. She never confronted Vader again. And at this point in Star Wars canon, we don't know what she was up to. You know, a lot of people may think that when Ahsoka was brought back out of the portal, she basically time skipped like 2 years. But that's not the
Hmm.
case. When Ahsoka was pulled back out from Ezra, she returned to the duel with Vader, to that moment, because we see her in season 2 walking out of the temple. She
Hmm.
never missed a single moment. She never missed a single beat. So what the fuck was Ahsoka Tano doing during the Galactic Civil War? Why did Yoda sit there and say that Luke and Leia are the only hope, that these twins are the last hope? Why did he say that when he was gone, the last of the Jedi, Luke would be, when there was Anakin Skywalker's literal apprentice just chilling out there in the galaxy?
Well,
That's when it starts to get like, whoa.
the scapegoat for a long time was that Ahsoka said in Rebel season 2, "I am no Jedi." So it was like, okay, so yeah, Luke and Leia are the only hope. Yoda says to Luke, "The last of the Jedi you will be when I am gone," because technically Ahsoka said she's no Jedi,
Hmm.
but that's kind of gotten ruined also.
Hmm.
So then it makes it even worse for this era, and you think that this would be a really cool story that somebody, maybe not Dave Filoni, but that somebody would want to tell, like
Hmm.
Ahsoka's adventures, doing her own thing, because they can literally have her do whatever. But
Hmm.
no story has been told, and
Right.
we've moved on. We've moved on
Right.
either from further in the timeline. So it's like Star Wars does like to go back and fill things in. So I would love to know what she did. I think it would make for a great book. But for
Hmm.
right now, it's just like, why? What was the
Yeah.
point? And I feel really bad saying that because I am happy
Hmm.
still that she was brought back through the world between worlds. And I don't necessarily I see the poeticism of her dying at the hands of Vader in Rebels and her making that sacrifice, and it only just like hurting Vader in the end.
Hmm.
Um because there's that moment where he kind of comes back for a second, but also Ahsoka was never going to be the one to bring him back. We know
Exactly.
that his son Luke was the only one that could do that.
Exactly. Because I think one of the plus sides to her staying alive this long is that so far Ahsoka's story has very much been serving others, especially Anakin Skywalker. We know that
Mm,
in the Clone Wars, like we mentioned, her entire existence is to basically justify his fall to the dark side. And it kind of does that. Like it makes it more interesting. It doesn't justify it, but it makes it make sense, right?
mhm,
Um, and then in Rebels, she's serving the story of the Rebel Alliance, and then she's fighting Vader. But from this point forward, when Vader has died at the end of the Galactic Civil War, Ahsoka can exist on her own, right?
mhm.
Presumably, because then in her show, it's focused on the Ghost Crew, and it's still tied to Anakin Skywalker. And to their credit, the story is Ahsoka trying to separate herself from Anakin's legacy, and that makes sense. But then when he's confirmed for Ahsoka season 2, it's like, when are we going to get this standalone story where Ahsoka truly is the main character and actually serving her own narrative rather than serving the story of like building the New Republic?
I mean, honestly, thinking of it, knowing what we know now, I'm like, maybe Ahsoka's own story is that story when she sits out the Galactic Civil War. Because that's the thing. I'm like, you brought her back to life. We're skipping into the New Republic era. But yeah, what's the point?
Hmm.
Where is Ahsoka going? Does
Hmm.
she really need to be helping the remnants of the Ghost Crew and like resolving their issues? Because by the end of Rebels, they're all perfectly capable
Hmm.
of like fighting the good fight, fighting for
Yep.
the rebellion, continuing to go on. We know they all survive other than Kanan.
Hmm.
So what is Ahsoka serving by being integrated into their story? Echoing what you've already said, like, when does she get to serve her own purpose? And
Hmm.
fingers crossed we'll see that in season 2,
Hmm.
but as of right now we just don't know. I feel
Yeah,
bad saying this, but I'm like, what is her point?
exactly.
What,
'Cause-
Dave Filoni, what are we doing? Where is
right.
Ahsoka going? Is she going to become a Force god? Is that the big epic thing that we're going to get at the end of it? I don't know if
I
I love
mean,
that, to be completely honest, but I have a feeling that's the way things are going.
oh, I think so. So, one thing I wanted to mention, I didn't know where to mention in this podcast, but I think this is a good point. I have a theory.
Mhm.
Ahsoka is immortal. She's never going to die. When the life force of the daughter was put into her from the father and she was resurrected, I think that that's when she became like this force god, this mystical being. She's not going to die. And every single time she has died, the force has basically said no. Like,
Uh-uh.
the force literally broke the rules of the world between worlds to bring her back. Like
Yeah.
literally broke the rules of space and time to bring Ahsoka back into the fold. When she died in the Ahsoka series, when Balin's skull kills her and she falls off of a cliff, she's resurrected within the series. Like she literally drowns and still comes
Yeah.
back to life. So I think at this point we can assume with Ahsoka season 2 tying back into the Mortis gods, and we see all this mystical force stuff coming into the picture, she's not going to die. Ahsoka will live on forever, and Dave Filoni will always get to wear his Ahsoka Lives shirt.
See, and as much as I love her as a character, that just feels so selfish.
Absolutely.
Um, it feels so selfish and like in his self-interest that he wants his beloved character to live on forever. I do love Ahsoka, but I do not want her to live on forever
Hmm.
because there are other characters that have other stories that we could be telling as
Yeah.
well. It doesn't have to be Ahsoka featuring da da da, Ahsoka
Hmm.
featuring Rebels or Rebels featuring Ahsoka, whatever you want to call it.
Hmm.
And my also worry about her becoming like a god, and almost like taking her place like Anakin was supposed to do in the Mortis arc.
Hmm.
I'm like, is she also then just going to sit out? Like, for example, if we're talking the Ahsoka series, if they can get to Mortis, is she just going to stay on Peridia forever and then send, Sabine back to the regular galaxy and is like, good job, y'all. I'll watch over you from afar. What's the
Can I
point?
just say, there is something funny that I just realized, some accidental commentary that I don't think Dave Filoni meant. But
Oh,
say Ahsoka Tano does become a Force god. Say she becomes Star Wars Jesus, right?
oh
Isn't
God.
it
Okay.
ironic that she sits out and watches all this bad shit happen that she could possibly control. She could possibly change, being the almighty being. She could change it, but instead she watches. She watches genocide happen. She watches
Oop.
all these horrible things happen. Isn't that what
Atrocities.
Jesus Christ supposedly does in the real world? I mean,
Now you're sounding like me. That sounds like some anti-religion bullshit, I would say.
I mean, but I'm joking, but it's also like kind of funny that it works out that way.
Well, unfortunately, they would just say it's all a part of God's plan. But that's a different podcast.
Yeah, the Gorman massacre was a part of Ahsoka's plan. So.
Not the Gorman massacre was a part of her plan. She really needed, Cyril to realize he was wrong and Cassian to rise up, and it's so
Exactly.
fucking stupid. Like, one of the big things that I don't understand is I'm like, and we've already glossed over this as well, talking about stories we haven't seen. When Ahsoka and Luke meet,
Mm-hmm.
we just skipped it. And I'm like, I'm worried that we're never going to get that story also. What'd she do
Mm-hmm.
during the Galactic Civil War? When did she and Luke meet? Why was she like, oh, Luke, I'll come watch you build your temple, but I'm not going to help you do anything?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
I
it's just so
wonder.
bizarre.
I wonder if they would be bold enough to have her meet Luke Skywalker during the original trilogy. Like have that pep talk moment that we're like talking about where she does intervene, but it's really just a pep talk.
That would be insane. And I feel like
Insane. I don't think there's
OT
a space
people,
for it.
well, I feel like OT, like diehards would despise that.
I think I might too, honestly, if they did do that. But then again, it's like, where does it work out? Like it doesn't work out. Like she should have died in Rebels. That's that literally every single time you think about it, or at least every time that I think about it, I always circle back to that. She should have
Okay.
just died in Rebels.
Are we really going to play this game right now? Because the perfect time for them to meet is like between episodes 5 and 6. Luke gets a magical power up out of nowhere.
Okay.
Like
Kills a
I could see,
lightsaber. Yeah.
right? However, at that point, he wouldn't be able to tell her that Anakin was redeemed in the end. So that doesn't feel poetic enough.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing. It's like, what do they have a check-in later? Me, and
Yeah.
honestly, I could see her being like, they're still good in him. And that's why
Mm-hmm.
Luke's like, they're still good in him. She knows it. I know it. Obi-Wan's Force Ghost probably says it too in this magical media piece that we're creating right now.
Mm-hmm.
I just want them to meet in animation.
Yeah.
That's all I need. That's all I need.
Yeah, because then you could have Ashley Eckstein and Mark Hamill as a voice actor, because Mark Hamill
And
does voice work. That's why I
and
always
not a
say we
deep
need
fake.
Luke Skywalker's temple. Where
And
is it
not
at?
some and that's the thing that worries me is if they were to do something during the OT, I don't want Rosario Dawson talking to deepfake Luke
Mm-mm.
Skywalker.
Mm-mm. I want Ashley Eckstein animated talking to Luke Skywalker animated.
Yeah.
Yeah, because then you have the two original actors. You don't have some weird deep fake and then this recast that largely ignores Ashley Eckstein's character.
Oop. Well,
um,
now that we've gone through the original trilogy, I feel like it's time to get into the big question of this episode is
mhm,
Ahsoka's presence in The Rise of Skywalker.
mhm. Yeah, I think what's kind of, I guess, sad about the way that Star Wars has released is that when Disney bought Star Wars, the first thing they released was the sequel trilogy. And when they made the
Mhm.
sequel trilogy, they wanted to ignore the prequel trilogy as much as possible.
Don't
And that
get me
includes
started.
the Clone Wars, that includes the characters in the Clone Wars like Ahsoka Tano. What if the sequel trilogy came out after the Clone Wars and after Rebels? Then you would have a good opportunity to bring Ahsoka into the sequel trilogy, and that's where she would finally have her time to shine, right?
Yep.
But the sequel trilogy came first, and there was no Ahsoka Tano until The Rise of Skywalker, where she's amongst a bunch of other dead Jedi, Force ghosts. She's the only one in that scene that is not confirmed dead. Literally everyone else is dead in that scene. So when Dave Filoni hops in and is like, maybe she was calling from across the galaxy or whatever, it's like, with everyone else who was dead? Like, what's up with
Well,
that?
Honestly, the perfect way to summarize that is what we've unfortunately already talked about is immortal force god Ahsoka calling
Mhm.
from Peridia or Mortis or wherever the hell you want to say. However, I want to talk about the comic specifically.
Okay.
You've seen the panel. I've seen the
Right.
panel. Another thing that I find bizarre about it is she very much looks like Mandalorian Ahsoka.
Right.
She
She's wearing the gray, right?
she's in the gray, and I'm sure behind the scenes it's just because that was the concept art that they had at the time.
Mhm.
If they even had concept art. But she's got one lightsaber
Mhm.
and she's looking very Ahsoka the Gray. So that also throws it off to me because I'm
Mhm.
like,
Wouldn't it be
the
Ahsoka the
timelines
White?
wouldn't it be Ahsoka the White? The timelines are not adding up. Like this feels like Mandalorian season 2 Ahsoka, which
Mhm.
doesn't make sense with the timeline. She wouldn't go back from being Ahsoka the White back to Ahsoka the Gray or
Mhm.
whatever. So it's just odd.
Yeah, 100%. And the whole comic is confusing, but that's because the movie's confusing. Because in the end, there, it's like, what is really happening? Are they actually like, are these the actual spirits of the Jedi speaking to Rey? Is this something she's like imagining, or like the Force is putting on to, motivate her to defeat Palpatine? There's so many
Yeah.
different explanations, but there shouldn't be. There should just be
Yeah.
one explanation, which
Well,
is the truth and what is canon. And that's why we see in this comic, they're depicting them as Force ghosts, but that's not canon that there were Force
yeah.
ghosts there. And that's where
Mhm.
it's like it continues to be muddy because Dave Filoni's talking about, well, that actually had nothing to do with my plan. And it was actually just a celebration of the Star Wars saga as a whole. And J.J. Abrams wanted to include animation. Rare J.J. Abrams W.
That's just because Ashley was on the payroll. But, like, that's another thing. It ruins continuity because it's Ashley Eckstein Ahsoka, not Rosario Dawson Ahsoka, which
Mhm.
makes it even more muddy.
Yeah, but like, who cares about that? Like, I didn't want it to be Rosario anyways. And to be
Yeah,
honest, we would not have even recognized her voice. We would have thought she was Ayla Secura or something.
right. Oh, Luminara. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I do really like the comic panel because I think it portrays what would have been more of a grand ending for the end of the Skywalker saga.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think it's
but
the version of the scene that everybody like accepts as canon. Like in my mind, the Force Ghost showed up and helped Rey. In my mind, a beautiful scene would have been Luke, Anakin, and Rey. Like Rey, as she's doing with the two lightsabers, and Anakin and Luke standing behind her, maybe just like doing a little Force thing. There's the three main
Anakin and Luke
characters.
or Luke and
Yeah,
Leia?
Anakin and Luke, because then it's like all the characters that once
Oh, I
faced
see.
Palpatine, and then
Okay.
there. It's a way to conclude it all. But like Leia would have been cool too, and if Carrie Fisher lived on, that's actually what would have happened. Is
Well,
that Leia would have gotten a lightsaber.
and on top of that, we wouldn't have had the Rise of Skywalker, but
Very true. No Palpatine probably at
we
all,
would have had a
actually.
completely different story.
Hmm.
R.I.P. Carrie, love you, babe.
But to bring it all back to Dave Filoni and the question of, is this all some grand plan, or is this just a case of Dave Filoni not being able to let go? It
Mhm.
doesn't help that immediately when The Rise of Skywalker released, Dave Filoni posts this picture to Instagram comparing her to Gandalf the Grey, who then became Gandalf the White. I don't know anything about Lord of the Rings. You're wearing a Legolas shirt, so maybe you can let us know.
Yeah, so, her journey and Gandalf's journey really mirror each other really well because
Mhm,
Gandalf has his he starts off as Gandalf the Grey.
mhm,
He's a wise, older mentor. I mean, he's literally a wizard.
mhm,
Um, oh god, I can't remember what the real name is for the wizard people in Lord of the Rings, but that's
mhm,
besides the point. He has a giant sacrifice where he fights the Balrog in and basically allows himself to go down fighting this monster creature to let the Fellowship of the Ring, the Fellowship, continue on in their journey, and that is what we think is his end. He
mhm,
eventually comes back after making that sacrifice as this further powerful, higher plane wizard Gandalf the White,
mhm,
and he has his big epic time helping fight off everything at the end of the movie, and it's like this big epic conclusion, and he gets to live off into the sunset. He doesn't die, but he's there
Mhm.
to continue to usher in a victory when it feels like all is lost. And
Mm.
I really think that that is what we're going to see with Ahsoka's future. That's kind of the future that I would prefer. And for
Mhm.
me, it makes most sense to do that in the Mandoverse climax movie that
Mhm.
Dave Filoni is directing. I would
Right.
imagine that he would want to, if he was ever going to kill Ahsoka or whatever, that it would be in his big project. So for
Yeah.
me, that feels like the best place for Ahsoka to either die, become one with the Force,
Mhm.
kind of step over from the physical plane to like the ethereal plane,
Mhm.
something like that. That's what I think should be the case and what I think makes sense. If she continues after this movie, I'm thinking we're kind of running her course.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. The well is running out. Um, a question for you. So, you said Gandalf doesn't die, right?
Mhm.
So, does he just never have a death, or is he immortal?
Good question. So the whole thing with the Astari, which is like the technical name for the wizards in Lord of the Rings, is that they do kind of exist in their own realm, kind of.
Mm.
I feel like that's the best way to describe it. They're not necessarily human. They can die, but it's like they have this otherworldly wisdom, to where they can basically act as assistants to the people, like the regular people that are in the world. So
Right.
it's kind of hard to explain to where it's like one foot in the real world, one foot out.
It sounds almost like a force ghost.
What, yeah, kind of like what we've known Force Ghosts to be, what they're kind of becoming now as we've got more
Mhm.
experience with Force Ghosts. However, well, then it's hard because Yoda could make lightning come as a Force Ghost, but
Mhm. And
Gandalf
they
still
interact
has
with the
more of
real
a
world.
he still has more of a physical presence. He's a physical person there. Anybody can see him. Like, it's not
Mhm.
just certain people that can experience things with him. Like, he is physically there.
Mm.
So that's what I mean where
Interesting.
it's one foot in, one foot out. Whereas Force Ghosts, I would consider not in the real world at all, just
Mm.
interacting
Well,
from a higher plane.
I mean, that makes sense. And Force Ghost, they got to explain it at some point, because it's like you have Obi-Wan sitting on a log, like you said, Yoda summoning lightning. So obviously they can interact with the real world, but how much are they actually a part of it? But that's the reason the reason I asked was because Ahsoka, is that possible? Is Ahsoka just never going to have an ending? Like, is it just going to be the camera pans up and the day keeps moving, and there's just the last we see of Ahsoka is just her being happy, and there's no death? What are we gonna see here? I don't know.
just
I honestly,
Just give us a little crooked smile and then a camera
mm,
pan off into the stars or some shit, and I'll be happy.
yeah, I honestly don't have like an ideal death for Ahsoka. My ideal death for Ahsoka would have been in Star Wars Rebels. Um, I can't really think of like equivalent to how she could like a sacrifice she has, or something she does sets up the sequel trilogy with like the New Republic. I mean, maybe she's supposed to kill Thrawn and then doesn't, and then he creates the First Order. I don't know, but then that's like, I don't want Ahsoka to have a negative impact on the sequel trilogy. I want her to
You know
have a
what?
positive one, like letting the Ghost Crew escape so that they could form the Rebel Alliance. Like, that's what I would want. But what could that be?
The only thing I could think of, and it's to their detriment because it's not built up enough at all, is if she were to kill off like the Night Sisters, but like the evil
Mm,
ones, the ones that use the dark side. That's like
right.
the only equivalent because unfortunately, Thrawn's a great villain, but not for Ahsoka.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
they what is he gonna get, an electro staff and fight her? Like,
Yeah,
don't
and I
Moff
mean,
Gideon Thrawn.
and don't forget that they're they're so not compatible as hero and villain that the person Thrawn's going up against in season 2 is not Ahsoka, it's
No,
Admiral
it's Admiral
Akbar.
Akbar, which is really exciting. I know we talked about that before, but that's just so exciting to think about. The only thing I could think of is maybe what Balin's going after. Maybe Balin's gonna have this crazy plan that could really mess things up.
Mhm.
So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm like, maybe the Night Sisters, they're building something up with the Night Sisters, but the Night Sisters clearly aren't doing anything with the First Order in the
Mhm.
sequel trilogy. I didn't even think about that. Somehow,
Yeah.
if she were to die at this point, what is she doing that
Mhm.
helps like usher in the new era of the sequel trilogy?
Mhm.
Or does she
Because
just sit out again?
I mean, it's possible she just, Leia's son is out there causing, catastrophe, and she's just like, "Fuck it, it's got nothing to do with me." But yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, Ahsoka is a character that is shoehorned into these stories to try to impact them on a greater scale, like Anakin Skywalker. So the perfect conclusion for me is her impacting something big. And I just don't know how that'll happen with the sequels. Maybe she saves Leia or something. I don't know, but I feel like nothing is going to be as good as sacrificing herself so that the rebellion could be made, being killed by Darth Vader. Like it just feels perfect cinema, and I don't know why they backtracked it. I guess they didn't even
Well,
backtrack it because in season 2, like I said, we see her walk out of the temple. In Dave Filoni's mind, she was never dead, while the rest of the fandom was like mourning her death and like, oh my god,
me.
we're gonna see Ahsoka again. Dave
Hmm.
Filoni's like, Ahsoka lives. He has this fucking T-shirt in his closet the entire time. So
Yeah. Well, unfortunately for you, you're never going to get what you wanted for her end.
Mhm.
So, do you have a next best thing?
No, I don't. I genuinely don't.
Well, you heard mine. We'll see
Exactly.
what happens.
Yep, 100%. So, to answer the question, is this a case of Dave Filoni not being able to let go, or is there a grand plan? I think Dave Filoni can't let go. I think there's obviously a grand plan of like the Mandoverse, but in terms of Ahsoka, explaining why she's alive during the original trilogy, impacting the sequel trilogy, I don't think that there's a plan for any of that. I think it's
Well,
just like, I just want her to be alive and we'll see where it goes.
or like she's so great, we could have her here and it would be so cool, but like, is that worth shoehorning her in? But we
Mhm.
know that Dave Filoni loves a retcon, so he can just retcon the Rise of Skywalker and make her still
True.
alive because that's not above him, unfortunately.
hmm Maybe retcon Ben Solo's death while you're at it, Dave Filoni. Um,
Honestly, can Ahsoka sacrifice herself for Ben to live?
ooh, I don't know if I like that. I don't
I
know.
mean, he's a Skywalker.
Yeah. On that note, I think it's time for us to go. Well, Scotty, if there's nothing else, why don't you send us out of here since Ahsoka never will be?
Oh, well, make sure to follow us on social media at Wayseekers Pod so you never miss out on any of our episodes. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, may the Force be with you.